Welcome in, new edition of Celtics Beat on the day that the Patriots open their preseason against the New York Football Giants in Foxborough, which is only, to me, slightly less interesting, than doing another Kevin Durant, Jaylen Brown show. I didn't think, guys, that this was going to be the back-to-back week reality. Steve Bulpett was with us last week. Ian, we talked extensively about this issue, but there are new angles. There are new things to talk about. And as I was saying to Evan before we came on, honestly, if we weren't talking about this, we'd be breaking down like whether the pride of Haverhill, Noah Vonleh, has a roster spot, or looking ahead to the October preseason schedule. So look, content's content, man. This is good.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, when you have, I think Xanis, our one of our content creators and leaders of the particular network that we're on, he again, as much as this might be, we want to all see, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in a ring together. The fact that this is a discussion here in early August and it's a relevant discussion, it's great for content, baby, and that's what we care about here at this particular network. So again, I don't hate the fact that we're talking about it because there's relevant stuff to be had and there's a lot of discussions to be had. But at the same time, like, yeah, games are going to be way more fun to talk about.
Well, and Ian, I want to know if you're tired of all this. Maybe you're enthused by it. I don't know, but I'll just tell you to sort of build on a little bit of what we got into last week. I think the only reason that I'm sort of annoyed by the whole issue is not even that I don't think it's a good idea, and I am adamantly against the idea of dealing Jaylen Brown and a boatload of picks and smart or whatever combination of whatever it is that's been reported. And we'll get to some of the more recent reports that have happened since the last show during this week. We'll talk about all that, but it's not even the trade package that I am against. It's just the fact that like every fiber of my being, Ian, every bone in my body, despite what the Ryan McDonoughs, and I love Ryan, but despite what like some of the people out there have said, I just don't believe this is going to happen. And so for me, it feels like we're just going on and on and on, entertaining something that isn't like, there's no point. Like, we're just sort of wasting our breath because this is not going to come to fruition.
I understand why you feel that way, Adam. I'm really a coin flip about whether it's going to happen. If I had to lean one way or the other, I'd say it is going to happen. That's obviously with no reporting whatsoever. Just thinking about all the other times in past years where these kinds of things come up. And ultimately, what we've learned over and over again is the power is with the player. The player ultimately defines the marketplace and defines his value. And I remember years ago when something like this happened in the NBA, and one of the big time general managers in the league said to me, if history has proven anything, any star in this league can be a big enough ass and get himself traded if he wants to be. And so I think what you saw Kevin Durant do recently is he moved in that direction, right? He's sort of laying down an ultimatum, and he's letting them know he might be willing to burn the house down and to force them to trade him. This is not the last card he's going to play. If he's gone as far as to say I can't work with the GM and the coach, and they're not willing to do anything about it, well, he's going to build on that. He's not just going to, okay, you called my bluff, that's it, I'm done. He's not going to do that. He's going to keep pushing it. So we can get into all the reasons if the Celtics should, under what circumstances they should make a trade like this. But ultimately, he's, even at his age, with his injuries, he's the best player in the deal. I understand exactly why Brooklyn doesn't want to trade him, because they disappear off the face of the earth if they do. They mean nothing in that city if they lose Kevin Durant. So I understand what they're up against, but he's got the power. He really does. And to what extent he wants to get traded and how much he wants it to be Boston, that's going to be up to him.
All right, so let's break some of this stuff down, because as you just mentioned, Kevin Durant's willing to burn the house down. When we did our show with Steve Bulpett, who had reported that Kevin Durant was going to be sitting down with ownership, at the time that we recorded that last show, That meeting hadn't happened yet. It since has, and in the very unlikely event that anyone out there listening or watching only gets their Celtics news from this show and not Twitter or other podcasts, here's the latest. Kevin Durant met with the owner and, as Ian alluded to, said, it's either me or it's Sean Marks, the GM, and Steve Nash, the coach. You got to pick. Either get rid of those two or get rid of me. And the owner has since, gone out. He sent a tweet and saying that I support my front office and head coach. So we'll see what direction that all goes in. There have been other reports. Adam Himmelsbach of the Boston Globe, a friend of this show as well, reported just yesterday that this is unbelievable, that the Nets first asked for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And basically, and these are my words, not Adams, well, I guess they are Adams, right? After the Celtics stopped laughing, the deal or potential deal evolved into Brown and Marcus Smart and a massive haul of future picks. But as of right now, this moment, there's no traction on a deal getting done. Kurt Heelan reported that Rob Williams is unavailable. He is not part of this. The Celtics are not moving him, which is good news to a lot of people out there. Ian Begley, Durant reportedly wants to play with Marcus Smart. So then does that turn into a Derek White thing? And why is it Marcus Smart? Is he doing that to further handcuff the Nets in a potential deal in saying that? Because obviously Smart is a better player than Derek White, and he's the reigning defensive player of the year, and he knows that the package is not as massive going the other way. We could talk about all that if we want to. Bobby Marks believes that if a deal does get done, it's going to be more of a January midseason thing. If Celtics are floundering like they were at the beginning of last year, they're sitting above 500. They believe Kevin Durant puts them over the top. They make a move like that. And of course, the Nets, the Raptors, they are teams that are still lurking in the situation. But among the many reasons, Ian, that you are, a great guest, and you always are, but a great guest for today is what you've already said. I don't think the deal's going to happen. I'm not even sure how Evan feels, but you think in flipping the coin, you would lean toward the deal is going to happen. So without any reporting on your own part, as you acknowledged, what do you think the deal is going to look like if it does go down?
Well, what are the Celtics willing to give up in the way that they think they're better after the trade than they were before? So if Marcus Smart's in the deal, then they're just not the same team. They've got to win now with offense more than defense. And I don't think anybody in Boston wants that to happen. I think that's a very short-term way for them to build their team. I mean, that what they built right now is the arguably the best defensive team in the league, and lots of switching, and Marcus is the embodiment of all that. And if that reporting is true that Kevin Durant wants to play with him, well, then Durant sees it the same way. He knows how hard it is to play against them, play against Marcus, knows how valuable Marcus Smart is, and how he gives that team an edge. He gives them their identity, which is a defensive identity. So, first of all, let's say the Celtics, let's just assume the Celtics do not make the deal if Marcus is in it. Now, how do they get to that point? To me, you do it by saying to the Nets, you know what? We had this conversation a while ago. It leaked out. We don't want to say who leaked it out, but it wasn't us. And we're not happy about that. And we're not talking anymore. We're not interested in it. And don't talk to them at all. And let them come begging to you to make a deal. And Durant can help empower that by basically making it clear to the Nets, whoever else you trade me to, maybe he wants to go to Philly too, whoever else it is. But if you don't trade me to one of these few teams, when they get me, I'm going to be very unhappy, and I'm going to make their lives just as miserable as I'm making yours now. So when the Nets asked for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they were living under this like false universe idea that they had power in this thing, and they don't. They just don't. The player has the power. And so like in that theoretical world where they can get everything they want and they can set the standard, yeah, they can ask for everything and then say, well, we're just not trading them. But as you come up to the season, and if Kevin Durant's making more and more of a public nuisance of himself, and he's just kind of making you feel like you're fools for paying him the $40 million, everything changes, and these guys, they just get traded. They just do. So that to me is the Celtics approach, is to just back off and don't be the ones coming to them asking them to make the trade. Let them convince you to make the trade. Let them be the ones who are begging to get something from you, knowing that there are only a couple of teams probably that Kevin Durant's willing to go to in the first place.
Right. And if you look at that last move by Durant to say, it's me or your front office and coach, that kind of probably hurts the Nets a little bit in the negotiating department because it's like, man, he really doesn't want to be here. I've looked at this from a few different angles, or at least tried to, and I just keep coming back to like, okay, so there's a lot of really like there's good players that are going to be involved in this thing, but I would assume, and I'm not sure if everybody feels this way because everybody loves the young rookie contract thing, but like I would assume that Jaylen Brown is the best player that's been reportedly talked about in trades with Kevin Durant. So to your point, Ian, if you're going to be the Celtics, you have the best player that they want. So you're going to say like, look, whatever offer you guys get, we obviously can top that. And if you're the Nets and you're Sean Marks, obviously you're going to see if the Celtics you're gonna before you make any deal, you're gonna see if Boston can get into this thing. Because at the end of the day, I mean, look, I love Scotty Barnes. He's a great player. I'm happy he's in Toronto, and it seems in a situation that is good for him with a smart head coach who's willing to put him all over the place, whether he wants to have him bring the ball up or now he's playing the five. Like, I like the fact that they're tinkering with Scotty a lot. I think he's in a good situation. But like, if you just like Jaylen Brown is better than Scotty Barnes. And I know the idea of Scotty Barnes and what he could be is it could be anything. It's like that Peter Griffin thing. The mystery box could even be a boat, right? So we have no idea. But Jaylen Brown, we know, has made one All-Star team, probably would have made another if he doesn't get hurt, and has a trajectory that we've seen over the past couple of years of here's a guy that works on his game, comes back every single year, better than he was the year before, and has turned himself into, I would say a guy in the all-star conversation versus Scotty Barnes, who's a really nice young player who, if given the trajectory, could turn into an all-star himself. But I rather deal with absolutes over, projected whatever. And again, if you're Boston, you're Brad Stevens, you're saying, you know what? Let the chaos commence. We have the best player that they could possibly want. I like where Ian's at. I think the weird thing about this whole thing is Durant gave more power to Boston. And I never thought about that until Ian brought that up. Boston has leverage over everybody because they have the ideal package that the Nets want. And I think as we get forward and move along here, just know that Boston will just kind of always be lurking around as much as other teams. Like, you're going to hear that Pat Riley's in. You're going to hear the Raptors are in. The Lakers will be trying to do whatever they can to get involved in any of this because they're trying to change their roster to a different thing. But Boston's just going to sit there and say, you know what? We're good. And I think we talked about this last week. Yeah, didn't we talk about this last week with the Celtics are the favorites in Vegas for the title anyway. They don't have
right now without doing a thing.
They don't do any of this. We're good. So
plus 400 on our friends Bet Online. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But yeah, they are the championship favorites.
So we're good. Well, if you're Brad, like, this is great. Like, okay, we can, maybe have Durant, maybe not. Call us if but we're good. We're fine.
I think it goes back to what you were saying about how much, and we don't know. Like, there are all sorts of reports out there, but nobody knows that at least is on the record. How much does Boston want this? Because I think we do believe, regardless of what the rest of the package looks like, whether it's Smart or Derek White or Grant Williams and someone else, and a litany, picks for the next 10 years and pick swaps and all. I don't know. What I do know is, or at least I believe, there's no way this deal happens if Jaylen Brown is not a part of it. Okay, it's Jaylen Brown plus something. So how much does Boston, if it does? How much does Boston want Kevin Durant? Because as much leverage as the Celtics do have, I agree with what you guys are saying. I do. But short of, Kevin Durant hasn't gone nuclear yet. He's causing trouble.
Hang on a minute, though.
Fires in the corner of the room, but he hasn't done the whole Heath Ledger Joker, blow up the hospital, walk around, walk away with it in his background. He hasn't gone nuclear to the point where he has said straight up, listen, trade me or I am holding out. I am not playing for you again. And until that happens, and I don't think that ever happens, by the way, I think if there's a push comes to shove, calls the bluff, he's a net again. I really do. I do believe that. I don't think he's willing to go to that length. And until that happens, Ian, I just think the Nets still have a little bit more power than we're giving them credit for.
Oh, they might. And if that's what he ends up doing, yeah, for sure. Again, my whole point of view is this is up to Kevin Durant. How far does he want to go? And if he wants to be in that long line of players, most recently James Harden twice,
Yeah.
who just makes life impossible for the employer and they just want to get rid of him. If he wants to do that and he wants it to be Boston, then he can make it happen. But if he has to do things that he doesn't feel comfortable with, then he won't do them. And that'll kind of define for all of us how badly he wants to have this happen and be in Boston in the first place. I mean, my own feeling is, God, you would have a great situation if you stayed with Brooklyn. Kyrie's playing for a new deal after being humiliated in the marketplace. So this is the last great year you arguably are ever going to get out of Kyrie Irving. This is now the time to cash in with him. And Ben Simmons, if both Durant and Kyrie are there, this is the perfect opportunity for Ben Simmons to work his way back onto the court. And they seem to have good role players. And
hopefully Joe Harris is back.
Yeah. And then for all of the Knicks upgrades over the summer, you're still way better than they are.
Yeah.
So you still win New York. You get to like just put the pillow over their head, while they're shouting about how great they are. You just shove a pillow over their head.
There's no bing bonging going on.
Yeah. So it makes sense if he hadn't stuck his neck out the way he did and say it's me or them. It would have made sense for him to go back, but I don't know if he can now after having had that put out there that he wants them both and then he goes and plays for them.
Right.
I just, until he did that, in fact, I thought when Steve reported that he was going to go back to the Nets, I was sort of thinking he was going to go back and say, you know what, I'm going to back off. Let's see how things work out.
Yeah.
So this escalation by him just sort of tells me that he's not going to be there anymore. And then for the Celtics, who know Jaylen Brown better than anybody, they have a better sense than anybody for what his potential is. For me, I've always felt that if they are really, really confident that he's going to resign after 2 years, then maybe you don't do the trade, no matter how, even if you get Durant at a steal, but they know how good he is, how good he can be. They know they have a better feeling than any of us about whether he's going to stay after 2 years. Based on his recent hire of agent consultant, management consultant, and all the rest of it. So, and then you think if they could get him without giving up their defensive identity, well, maybe 3 or 4 years from now they're not as good, but next year they'd be better. In my opinion, they'd be better with Durant than Jaylen Brown just next year and maybe the year after. And having Durant as the number 2 guy as he ages would make things a bit easier for him in the way the Lakers have always hoped that Anthony Davis would have made it easier for LeBron and with the Lakers. So I put it all together.
Millions of dollars at age 37.
Yeah, exactly.
If he's even here, by the way, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but this is something that I said to Steve last week, Ian, is I don't know Kevin Durant personally, so forgive the personal attack, I guess, if you're out there listening, Kev, or lurking in, with all of your Twitter accounts and everything like that. But I don't trust him. I don't trust him. Like the Celtics, they've got some very confident players with strong egos right now, and you have to be to play at that level. So that's not a criticism. What they don't have in this moment could develop at some point, but what they don't have in this moment are divas. And Kevin Durant is a diva. And look, some guys are, some guys aren't. But Kevin Durant most certainly
that, is. Though? Don't you?
I'm not even saying he hasn't earned it, but it scares me. Not a lot of guys, no matter what you've earned, not a lot of guys do a lot of the stuff that Kevin Durant has done in recent years, most recently, obviously, this meeting with ownership, or done what Kevin, what James Harden did twice, or all the junk that Kyrie Irving has pulled in recent years, even independent of the vaccine, regardless of how you feel about that. Just general day-to-day professional athlete stuff, diva behavior. And I can't, people like to sort of harken back, Ian, to well, Brown has 2 years left in his deal and Durant has 4 years left in his deal. I can't sit here and confidently say Kevin Durant, even if you make the trade, is still here in 4 years. He's not going to ask out in 2. It could happen. Like that's beyond the realm of possibility. Look what's happening right now. So I don't trust him. I'm not saying that's a good reason to not make the trade either, but I just don't trust him.
No, and why would you? Why would you trust him? But the whole league is not as reliable as it used to be. And this whole idea of building young teams that are going to last forever, it just doesn't really exist anymore. And you can think back to all of the young cores that have been built up over the years, and something always happens and it just falls apart. It rarely works. It rarely holds, right? And so if the Celtics were really sure that Jaylen Brown was going to sign after 2 years, would they have said something to the effect of, "Well, we might include him in the deal for Kevin," knowing that's going to get out? You know, I mean, once that gets out, if you have a feeling that Jaylen Brown might be leaving, you're sort of helping push him in that direction by that coming out, especially coming off a finals appearance where he was their best player in the finals. So trusting Kevin Durant, I agree. There shouldn't be any trust on him. And when I say like Jaylen Brown only has 2 years, I'm not saying that, oh, Kevin's got a much better deal with 4 years on this contract, because I don't think you can look past a year or two anymore in the NBA. You just can't. When you have a chance to win the championship now, you just have to go for it. And you can't be thinking, well, 3 years down the line, it's going to be this, because there is no 3 years down the line in the NBA. This is a league where you're coach of the year 1 year and you're fired the next year. Where Kevin Durant is with Steph Curry and he trades him for Kyrie Irving, where they go to Brooklyn and they're going to be the super team, and then it falls apart in no time whatsoever. There's no future in this league. There's
Where Gordon
no
Hayward goes down 5 minutes into his contract and is never the same.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a traditional way of it falling apart. I'm talking about all of these pressures, and anybody that thinks this is just a temporary thing, I mean, guys pretty soon are going to be routinely making 60 million a year in this league, and they're talking about players who were drafted this year are going to retire with $1 billion in on the court earnings by the time they're. So it's just going to be harder and harder to keep teams together. And then you think about the race with the Lakers, and the Celtics are under more pressure to win the championship than any other team in the league, really, among all the realistic contenders, just because of that. I just think you have to go for now all the time. In a qualified way. You don't throw everything away for now, but if you can get Kevin Durant and he makes you better right now, which he would if they don't give up any of their defensive stars, I just think you really have to consider that.
Well, you talk about winning in the now, and like Durant would, trading for Durant would, I guess increase your chances of winning now, pending what you give up. You know, we talked about this with Bullpet, last week. It's a team that I mean, I believe will wear you down, in the regular season with how good they are defensively, especially in the backcourt. I mean, they're going to have Smart, Jalen, Brogdon, and Derek White as their 4 rotational guard players. And you can make the argument that Jalen is more of a wing player. I mean, I don't know. He lines up with the 2, so that's where we stand. So they're going to have this ability to just be a little bit fresher with that. So like my thing with Stevens is, if you're Brad, like, okay, yeah, trading Durant might increase your chances in one way, but Ian, as you said, it might decrease your defensive versatility, which is what made you an NBA Finals team in the first place. I mean, this is a team, that you don't usually have a team that's a favorite to win the title has the ability to trade for the second best player on the planet. And you look at if he's unhappy now, would he be unhappy? I think Kevin has maybe had some things not go his way. I think Golden State was a great fit for him, but he just didn't feel like he was getting enough credit that he thought he deserved.
The
In Golden
multiple
State.
finals MVPs didn't do it for him.
No, I mean, but think about this. It's not about. I mean,
It
getting
was
the
still
awards is
Steph's
great,
team.
but people just don't want to give Kevin enough credit for that. They still want to make it all about Steph and Clay and Draymond, and Kevin is there, and Kevin won Finals MVP, but he doesn't. It doesn't feel like it carries the same weight as the other guys. So he goes to Brooklyn, and then things blow up because James Harden doesn't want to stick it out, and Kyrie's too busy doing other stuff. So it's I think we're being a little too harsh on Kevin in terms of how much can we trust the guy. Okay, he stuck it out in Oklahoma City for quite a long time until he just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I think he gave Oklahoma City as much as he possibly could until it was like, this obviously isn't going to work. They traded James away. They realized at that point that there was no way they were going to contend with Golden State with the firepower that they had. And so he left and joined them. It just so happened that he joined that team because of the salary cap spike, right? So
But clearly he and Russ couldn't coexist anymore either.
right. So, but my point being, like, we're all worried about Durant being a flight risk. I mean, the past says that, yes, but it also says that if you create an environment that Durant likes enough, which I think Boston could probably curate between the fact that he wouldn't be the go-to scorer as he ages, the fact that he wouldn't have to play as the best defender on the team because he'd have Smart and Tatum there. Okay, he wouldn't have to carry all that defensive responsibility. You'd have a coach in Ime that he obviously respects a whole lot. It Boston might just be that perfect environment to give Durant exactly what he wants. And I just think what we do a lot is we're trying to say, like, oh, Durant wouldn't, like, he would be a flight risk. I'm like, well, as Ian pointed out, everybody's a flight risk every single season if you hold enough power. I think Boston would be able to give him what he really wants. A fair share at having enough respect at the end of the day if they win a title. B, less pressure than Brooklyn and all these other places to be the guy all the time, every single game. And he'd have a coach that he really likes and respects. And as we've seen with Ime, he's not afraid to call people out in the media. Steve obviously has had several chances to do so, and doesn't do that. Ime might just be the perfect guy to come down on Kevin. So as some people say, it might be a bad thing to trade for him. I think Boston actually would be the best place for Kevin Durant because it would give him everything that he needs.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about when he went to Golden State, they had already won the championship, and so he looked like he was just tacking on. But here, the narrative would be, okay, they were close. Their offense fell apart. They didn't have enough firepower. Tatum was overwhelmed, and the old hand came in and showed them the way. I look at what Garnett got out of playing in Boston on the back end of his career, and how the energy of the place, especially in the playoffs, just kind of ran electrically, and he fed it back, and I bet Durant would appreciate that. To whatever extent we can try to predict how he responds to things, but I'm just imagining, as good as Jason and Jaylen are together, imagine the firepower of Jason and Durant, and how do you stop them? Two guys in the front court in a league that just keeps getting smaller. Both play big, for where they are on the floor. And Durant is not a bad defender. He's a very good defender. He blocks shots. He understands defense. When he was in the playoffs with Golden State, he was terrific defensively. He and Draymond were arguably their two best defenders. So and he passes. So this idea of running the offense entirely through Jason, the way they were doing in the key stretches of the playoffs, well, now it would be a two-headed deal, you, and and you wouldn't worry about all of the senseless turnovers, um, controlling the ball the way you had in the last playoffs. So look, I'm not saying this is a no-brainer to make the trade for him. I just think in the here and now, there's I have no problem imagining all the energy there would be in Boston if Kevin Durant was on the Celtics and they didn't have to give up a ton for him
So
if you added him.
I I'm not even disagreeing with that. I just to sort of bottom line this thing for me, and for anyone watching versus listening, this shirt, I'm wearing a shirt that has Tatum, Brown, and Smart on it. It's just a little I don't know, a present day big three or whatever we want to call that, I guess, and wanting to see more of that develop. For me, Ian, and shout out to our friends at Homage, the I just I know I brought up the flight risk stuff or the lack of trust stuff, and like I stand by all of it, but that's not the bottom line for me, as much as it's relevant to all of this. The bottom line for me, especially after watching last year and considering the moves that were made in the offseason, the fact that the Celtics are sitting there right now as the championship favorites today, no more moves, don't have to do a single thing. You are at the top, at least with regard to what your expectations are. To me, depth is extraordinarily important. It's extraordinarily important over the course of a grueling NBA season and an even tougher couple month playoff season if you're fortunate enough to go on it. And while I agree, if you add Kevin Durant, you subtract Jaylen Brown, and there's no debate that one is better than the other right now, regardless of what they're going to look like in a few years. Right now, there's no debate as to who is better than the other. You would get a little more top heavy than you are presently, for sure. But I can't help but look at that and say, Rob, Marcus, Brogdon, Durant, Horford with age, maybe there are serious injury risks on this roster to where your depth could disappear in a blink. And yes, if you don't make a move, that's still the case for sure. But if you don't make a move, at least you got a little more to work with than you would trading away multiple players, multiple rotation players for Kevin Durant, and sacrificing depth, potentially a lot of it, potentially multiple starters, to get only marginally better in my eyes anyway. Maybe some people disagree and think you'd be substantially better, but to me, only marginally better. I just don't think it's worth it. That's ultimately, that is the bottom line for me, Ian. That's where I land.
And I agree with you. If they have to give up too much, even in terms of depth, then they shouldn't do it. If it's true that they're operating from a position of strength where they think that Jalen's going to stay on, even after all this talk. But that's why the gamesmanship is going to be a big part of it, and letting the Nets come to you when they're at the end of their rope, and the Nets are saying, okay, what's the best way we can save face and move forward? We can say we're starting. We know this thing collapsed, but look what we're getting out of it. Two guys approaching their peak in Jaylen and Simmons. We're trading Kyrie for Russell Westbrook and a draft pick. And he's going to fit right in with the energy that we're bringing in. And Jalen's a growing star, and we feel very confident that he's going to want to stay in the New York area and fulfill his stardom here for the long haul. So we're not worrying so much about losing him the way we've lost these other guys. So we tried it that way, and now we're trying this way. And think about when we made the trade with Boston all those years ago. If you would have told us that we would have come out of it with Ben Simmons and Jaylen Brown, we would have said, fantastic, that's great. So they can make that trade and bring in Jaylen Brown and at least tell that story. I don't know how much people will believe it, but it's a good story for them to tell. And they can say, our two betters are better, or our two players are better than the next best two players, and they
So
can
Ian,
make that case too.
the question then is, what is too much? Like, let's just boil it down to that. You know,
So
I sense that you believe Brown and Smart and picks too much.
yeah,
Maybe so. If the latest thing that Himmelsbach wrote, if it's Brown and pardon me, Brown and White and 4 or 5 combination of picks and pick swaps, is that appropriate or is that still too much?
that's not too much. But I don't know. That's where you don't know if the Nets would go for that, and that's where this whole question of what's Durant's play going to be in all of this. And he already sent a signal that he's going to be big on it. You know, he's going to be pushing, and so if it's the Celtics against the Nets for Kevin Durant, that's a tough one. But if it's the Celtics and Kevin Durant versus the Nets, and Kevin's behaving in a way that helps ensure that he has the most possible talent waiting for him in Boston when he's traded there. That's this whole idea of gamesmanship, and the Celtics have to be willing to say no, and they walk away. And they
Right.
walk away from it. And then you see what happens. And they say, look, you know what? We don't like this. We're happy going in next year as the Vegas favorites with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. We're fine. Good luck with everything. Say hi to Kevin for us. Take care. Hang up. You know, that kind of stuff, that kind of gamesmanship. That's what these trades come down to, I think. And that's what there's going to be a lot. You know, if there is a trade for Kevin Durant, um, somebody's got to write the story about all the twists and turns of the negotiations, and there's going to be a whole lot of people walking away from the table before they finally come back down again.
The thing that is getting interesting is, like, if you look at some of the names that are floated out there from other teams, you know, if you know, and it's always interesting to read some of the tea leaves and things. So we don't, we have no idea what's been offered, what hasn't been offered. You know, we had Steve on last week, and I kind of prodded him a little bit about how he had mentioned that maybe the trade, the Jalen White in a pick, that particular piece of information didn't even come from Brooklyn itself. It might have come from some other team who's trying to damage the relationship between Jalen and the Boston front office. So I'm always kind of like, in the back of my head, I have that going on. But if you look at some of the stuff that reportedly is on the table, like, you know, apparently, like, you can't, Scotty Barnes is like too much for Toronto. You know, Miami's not willing to move off of Bam at all. They want to add KD, as they should. They want to add KD to Bam and to Jimmy. Um, they're willing to throw Tyler Hero into the deal. It's like Jaylen Brown is so much better than those two guys. It's like not even funny. So it gets me thinking, like, does Boston even, like, is there a world in which Boston's like we're not offering you Jaylen Brown at all because the other offers you have around you don't even compare to what we're offering. So come back to us when you think you have an offer that's comparable to the other ones, and then maybe we'll talk about it. Because again, Boston just went to the NBA Finals with those two guys. I wouldn't be trying to trade off those two guys if I were Boston, frankly. You know, if the bidding got to be ridiculous, which I think Brooklyn tried to do, then yeah, maybe you got to throw Jaylen Brown to get a guy like Kevin Durant. But I just don't see the match here because of, as something you alluded to earlier, Boston knows everything about Jaylen Brown more than any other team does. And it seems like to me, every step of the way, they've been pretty adamant that Jaylen Brown is one of our guys. I mean, how many chances have they had to quote unquote trade Jaylen Brown and didn't do it? They offered him an extension. I'm sure if Jaylen were willing to take one right now, they would offer Jaylen an extension, but does
Yeah, it
not
would be
move Jaylen Brown
no.
to have that right now. And Keith Smith, our buddy over at Spot Track, just outlined why Jaylen would not take a contract and the other things surrounding Jalen's next deal. Go over there and read that. But again,
it has nothing to do with the Celtics, by the way. It
Yeah.
would just be fiscally irresponsible for
right.
them.
Again, if they could sign Jaylen Brown to an extension right now, they would do it, and we wouldn't even have this conversation. It's just because Jaylen has 2 years left. There's an upcoming free agency potentially coming, and Durant's, you know, kind of mad. So there is the kind of the perfect storm for this sort of story to take off, which it does. But if you if you put a gun to Brad's head right now, he said, "Hey, if Jaylen signed an extension, would you do it right now?" I bet you would, and just be completely out of this business and say we're done. Because I think Boston values Jaylen probably extremely high.
See, I'm not, and I know we got to wrap this thing up. I'm not sure I agree with all of that. Like if Jaylen Brown, he has 2 years left in his contract. If Jaylen Brown had 5 years left in his contract, I bet this is still a story.
From what side, though? Do you think Boston would entertain it less or more because of that?
Depends what they think of Kevin Durant. I think if they're as high on Kevin Durant as everyone wants you to believe they are, then yeah, I think it would. I just think you'd be getting that much lesser return because you'd have him locked up that much more. Maybe it's Brown, White, and a single pick as opposed to 5 picks. But I think it's still a story.
Yeah. I think because of the way Boston has always only talked about Jaylen, I think if it were a possibility that they could lock him up right now, it would just we wouldn't be talking about this. We'd be talking about normal August stuff, like where does Peyton Pritchard fit in this rotation, or what rookie, or I can't even be because JD Davison's the only rookie. What two-way player could get steal a cut? Like that's the normal stuff.
Is Kabengele the next Al Horford?
There we go. Like normal stuff the other teams do.
Do you have parting thoughts on all of this before we let you go?
The one thing we didn't talk about, and amid the concern about what Jaylen would do in 2 years and all of that, and if he'd want to stay, is this whole idea of the Supermax deal that he could get in Boston. And if he were to be all NBA and qualify for that, that's money he couldn't get anywhere else. And you saw Bradley Beal couldn't leave Washington because of that. And that's a big deal. And I'm sure it's a really big deal to Jaylen. And so regardless of any hurt feelings, the chance to make that kind of money would just, you can make that money and then you see other guys demand trades, once they're under contract. Current topic included. So I really think that that probably gives the Celtics quite a bit of confidence too about being able to move forward if this falls apart and say, look, Jaylen, let's get the most out of you this year and let's see if we can get you a lot of money.
Well, once again, this show is powered by betonline.ag. Go to betonline.ag today. Use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% welcome bonus. It's true. There are a lot of angles to this thing. And as we sit here on the mid-afternoon, August 11th, Jaylen Brown is still a Celtic. Kevin Durant is still a Net. And this is a topic that is not coming to an end anytime soon. So we're going to have to try. You know what we need to do? Well, Ian, you don't have to do this, but Evan and I have some homework. We need to figure out what our angle is going to be next week because this is still going to be here. So we just got to find a new twist on this thing. Maybe we'll get a new juicy report we can react to.
How much longer is Kevin Durant going to be better than Jaylen Brown? A full investigative deep dive. Although I'll say Zach Lowe, when he had Tim Bontemps on, they went over some of the, the points per possession when Jaylen and Durant are the ball handler in like pick and roll situations.
Yeah,
those numbers are way closer than you think they are.
Listen,
so I will say that it's not like, Durant's an all-world player, but the numbers as a pick and roll ball handler are, Durant is better, but it's not by a significant margin. It is very, 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 very close. So just keep that.
I know which player was drastically better in the 2022 NBA playoffs. I know that.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see. Ian, always a pleasure. Thank you for hanging out with us as always.
Thank you.
Ian Thomsen, Evan Valenti, I'm Adam Kaufman. We'll talk to you again next time. Thanks for listening.